And welcome to this episode of the podcast, where I'm delighted to be joined by Todd Caponi. Todd is, wait for it, a transparency nerd, a sales and science amalgamator, and a sales historian. Why wouldn't I want to talk to somebody like this? Todd, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm based on the kind of the pre-show conversation. I'm really looking forward to this.
We're going to have a giggle. I really want to talk about the transparency piece because I think that's very important, and it aligns totally with a lot of the work I do around collaborative selling and the using partnering skills. Because I think you said 3.5 pieces of PQ you would talk about in transparency, but we have more important things to think about. I think that's what we chatted about before, which is the sales history piece.
Yeah,
because you're dedicating a lot of time into looking into that now. Is that right?
And it's not for any purpose other than I find it fascinating. Like literally on the weekends, my kids are playing Minecraft or whatever, and I'm sitting there. Like for anybody who's watching this, I've got a collection of books on sales from the late 1800s or early 1900s, shelves of them. Like this one's 1916. I wish you could smell it because it smells like history. And it's fascinating to think that when you look at a LinkedIn post today, for example, for the most part, I can find a quote or a paragraph or a whole chapter from 100 years ago that I could pick up, pluck into LinkedIn today, and nobody would know the difference.
It is so cool. And that's why I knew that we'd get on, is that I sort of say, look, there is a lot of good stuff gone on before. I tend to go back as far as the 50s because it's just sort of easier to kind of encapsulate that. But we shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And now there's some stuff we should definitely be binning big time.
Oh, right.
But there is so much good stuff that's gone before.
Yeah, we were chatting before we hit record here about this idea that, LinkedIn every year they put out a post. Somebody puts out posts that just talk about the top 10 sales influencers of the year. And so the piece that I've been working on here for a while is I'm going to do the same thing. It's going to be the year's top sales influencers, but instead of 2022, I'm going to do 1922. And so I've collected, and right now I've narrowed my list down to 12, but there's like 4 or 5 that I would consider the greatest of all time in terms of thinking about the sales profession now and the individuals that laid the foundation for this over 100 years ago. People like Arthur Sheldon, who is barely mentioned in any sales history books ever. And this guy was the GOAT. Like there is no question that the things that he did around creating the philosophies that we still use today, grounded in honesty and transparency, like near and dear to my heart. He's got a slogan, it's a motto, and it's called, he says, business is the science of service. He profits most who serves best. Right? That's an Arthur Sheldon quote that is still used by the Rotary, which is a big, huge organization, as their motto today, right? Arthur Sheldon, sales guy. Right? There's so many people like that. One other one that I just want to point out is a woman named Lucinda Prince. Lucinda Prince, I believe, is the absolute pioneer for women in the sales profession. And she is not mentioned anywhere, like not in a history book. When people talk about where women got into the sales profession, nobody mentions her. I want to get her name out to everybody because like this woman recognized the need, and it wasn't a need based in an unfairness between what we're paying women and what we're paying men for the same job. What she recognizes that women just weren't getting the right education and the right focus. So she created women in sales schools back in the early 1900s that became so popular that sales was starting to be taught in high schools back then. And because of her, all under her direction. And she became the most sought after speaker for different women's groups around the country. Like this woman put sales on the map for women as a career that they could be proud of. And one last thing I'll leave you with on this point. I was reading an article about her, and one of her sales pitches to women was this. And as a husband, I get it. She talked about this idea that, hey, listen, sales, like learning that profession, is so foundational to anything in business that once you learn how to be a great salesperson, you've always got the ability to turn on the button that will bring in income. And women, this is especially important because there's a pretty good chance that your husband is going to be a loser or he's going to die. And so you're going to need to have this profession to fall back on. I was like, that's actually kind of funny. And it's a good sales pitch. Women, get that skill set, because when your husband turns out to be a loser or he dies of Spanish flu or whatever was going around back then, you've always got that parachute to fall back on. There's a whole pile of people beyond just Arthur Sheldon and Lucinda Prince that I could talk about all day that I just think are incredible human beings. And as a sales professional who loves this profession, I would just love to bring their names and their big brains to light here in the 2020s.
No, I love that. But sales are foundation to anything in business. That's great. I mean, I was doing something with a university just recently, and I wanted to say that this stuff's been around for a bit, and I used the Robert Louis Stevenson stuff. Thinking most students would know that.
Yeah.
But no, Lucinda Prince and Arthur Sheldon.
Well, yeah, and the sales in universities. I have a podcast called the Sales History Podcast, and it's only, I did one season so far. It's 13 episodes where I just monologue. I go through and I pick a topic and talk about it. And so I did a whole episode on the history of sales education in undergrad and even high school, kind of taking people through that. And it's amazing. In the early 1900s, sales was being taught at most of the more prominent universities in the country. So here in the US, Harvard and Yale and Wharton and like all the big ones, sales was being taught at the university level and the high school level back then. And then it went away. And it started to come back in the 1970s and 1980s. And we're seeing it much more prominently now, but there's a reason for all of that. And it's amazing how we've kind of gone through this ebb and flow. Much of it is tied to the perception of sales and the profession. Like young people today don't grow up going, I want to be a salesperson no, they don't. Like, why would they even choose that curriculum? It's a supply and demand issue. And back in the early 1900s, sales was trusted, it was admired, it was respected. And people grew up thinking that was a profession that they wanted to go into.
But that's interesting that was in the 1900s, because for me, why sales often has the bad perception is the whole snake oil thing.
Yes.
Which was the end of the 1800s.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Even that close to that time, people kind of got over that fast, and they went, actually, no, get rid of them. They're clearly unethical, but there's a lot of good stuff from this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really started with John Patterson. John Patterson is the founder of NCR, National Cash Register, back in the 1880s. And he really took on when you look at a lot of like corporate sales structures and the way that we think about things, from comp plans and quotas to, sales kickoffs, and like that all came from NCR. So many of the executives from NCR went on to do incredible things with other companies, but like that kind of signaled the beginning of, all right, snake oil salespeople and drummers and what were called bagmen there in the UK. They were the ones that would go and just sell, leave it, and be on with their lives. And as a result, they didn't really care. Once we got into the corporate world, where we started taking sales internally, things changed. But here's the big one. 1916. Here in the US, in Detroit, Michigan, there was something called the World Sales Congress that took place. And it's a sales conference, right? It was the first one of its kind at this level. And it was attended by 3,000 sales professionals from around the world. Here's the thing about it. So imagine a sales conference today where the keynote speaker is the president of the United States. Well, that was the case in 1916. President Woodrow Wilson was the keynote. That's crazy, right? Like, why would it? And then you add to it that, remember what was going on in the world in 1916, World War I. Now, the US wasn't in it yet, but they were trying to figure out whether they should get into it or not. And there's a president speaking at a sales conference. That's crazy. Well, not quite. Here's why. At the time, the United States saw an opportunity during the progressive era of the Industrial Revolution, right? Where we figured out manufacturing and assembly lines and we could really up production. The US looked at this opportunity, which was happening right then, which was, hey, we've got a chance to get a real head start on the rest of the world and become a superpower. And the key to making that happen is salespeople. Salespeople selling the right products to the right companies for the right price at the right time. When companies succeed, because the salespeople, they hire more, the economy grows, and then you as a salesperson and everybody else benefits from that, right? Salespeople doing right by their customers benefits everybody. And that was really the theme back then is, hey, salespeople, we're counting on you. Like, this is on you, right? And we trust you and we respect you and we're going to pay you really well to do this. And so that was a time when sales was truly respected and admired because we were all counting on them. And salespeople that did wrong by customers were really frowned upon at the time. And that changed. That changed over time. That changed with technology, believe it or not. I actually look at, I've got a whole nother rant that I could go on about this, but about the fact that salespeople were given incredible gifts of technology, the telephone, email, even LinkedIn, video. And in every case, we've ruined it. And I believe that the prominence of the telephone was the beginning of the end for the sales profession.
Okay. So, because I was going to actually ask, where did it all go wrong then? Because it just sounds absolutely sweeping, like, sales people are, kind of holding the future of business and growth and everything. But it's the technology and it's the telephone in particular. So you've got to give us a little bit more on that. What went wrong? Where did it come off the rails?
When you think about the early 1900s, if you're going to sell something, you had to do it face to face. You had to look the person in the eye. You had to do it human to human, right? Now, the Great Depression of the late 1930s, that started to really sully the profession of the sales, like the sales profession too, where you had salespeople going door to door, like bringing their kids with that are like, if you don't buy, my son, he doesn't eat, right? Like there was stuff like that was making things kind of gross. But, the telephone, in my opinion, was the greatest gift ever given to salespeople. And like I said, we ruined it in that salespeople no longer had to go door to door, wear through their shoes in the rain and the snow and travel. They could just sit home and make calls and have those types of conversations. But salespeople in the profession started to see scale in what I believe is kind of a 5-letter dirty word, right? Which is we're going to scale at all costs. It's all about numbers. It's all about quantity. Call. Bother people. Don't let them hang up. Trick them into buying stuff because you can't even see them. So, that whole trust element that we're going to talk about in a little bit, it became a lot easier to get away with being untrustworthy. We ruined the telephone to the point where technologies had to be developed to prevent salespeople from selling, like Dr. Shirley Jackson creating the technology that led to caller ID. The purpose of caller ID is so that you can see if a salesperson's calling you, right? And that didn't work. And here in the US, we had to create the do not call registry, which now has like 22 million phone numbers on it. The government had to get involved to stop salespeople. So we then fast forward to email. Even amazing gift, right? Even better. We've got the ability to, instead of having to put something in the mail or catalog or something, like I could send you an email, hit enter, and it shows up in your inbox instantly. Like, how amazing is that for salespeople? And once again, we ruined it. We ruined it again, going back to scale, to where technologies had to be created to prevent salespeople from selling with junk inboxes, right? And IP blacklists and all of that. So you've got your spam filters. That was all developed because of salespeople. And then fast forward again, that didn't work. Government had to get involved again. And here in the US, we have the CAN-SPAM Act of 2005, which is meant to prevent salespeople from selling, right? We keep getting these incredible tools and we keep ruining them because we're blinded by scale. And so today, when I look at like the use of LinkedIn, incredible gift. I can see a person's whole resume. I can see their face, where they live, what they're interested in, what they post about, what they like. That's incredible. What an incredible gift to hyper target. And instead I spam people And I do pitch slaps where they accept my LinkedIn connection and I slap them with a pitch. Like it's constant ruining because we're blinded by scale when we've got this incredible tool in front of us. So today, when I look at the tech stack of sales exploding, I think that anybody listening to this, if we don't know history, we're doomed to repeat it, right? That's the old line. I think that if we use technology for good, not evil, we all win, right? All of our economies win. When salespeople are doing right by the customers and using technology to hyper target and to be more of an aid to customers instead of going, oh, scale, quantity, that's when we ruin it. And that's what worries me looking into the future about the tech stack explosion in the sales world, is if we use it wrong, sales will continue to go down in reputation. If we use it right, I think there's an incredible opportunity. And again, if we don't know history, we're probably doomed to repeat it.
And I wonder if before each of these, when people started suggesting using a telephone, were people saying, "Nah, that won't work"?
Oh, yeah.
Did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Email, nah, no one people answer it. Oh, now everyone uses it. Yeah, LinkedIn. Actually, we're kind of, a lot of people say, no, that doesn't work. A lot of people are now spoiling it already. And video, a lot of people say, no, this isn't going to take off. But you're saying, actually, we will be having this conversation in a few years' time. But guess what? Video ruined that. Next, holograms. Oh, someone's about to break that.
That's great. Yeah, it is amazing that back in the 1910s, 1920s, the phone was invented in the late 1800s. It did not become prominent for a long time, and it wasn't used in a sales capacity until the 1950s. So, for the most part, there was a lot of reasons why you wouldn't use it, other than maybe to replace an upsell or to place an upsell or something like that. Maybe you'd make an outbound call as a buyer, but salespeople did not use it for many, many years until call centers started figuring out that they could start to bang out outbound calls in the 1950s. And then that's when, the telephone became that evil thing in the corner for most families that are going to bother them during dinner instead of a good thing that they're going to use as a communication device to keep close with friends and family. So it's, but yeah, that's exactly the case, that at the time, the phone was not thought about as being a future sales tool.
So let's let's bring ourselves into the present and talk about doing things right. Mm-hmm. So you have an opinion on doing things right, which is about being transparent. Transparency is one of the ways in which a salesperson can be more human, picking up on what you just said, and starting to do the things which actually are going to be ethical and correct and make a difference. Yes. So we need to understand a little bit more about this. So what do you even mean by transparency?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing.
Start off nice and simple.
Yeah, I mean, it's an overused word that is often genericized and confused with just being honest or just being authentic or just being, whatever. And here's where it started. In my last role, I was the chief revenue officer of a company here in Chicago called Power Reviews. You probably guessed from the name, we were in the reviews space, right? We helped retailers and brands collect and display ratings and reviews on their website. So today you go to a retailer site, you look at a product, you scroll down, there's reviews. There's a decent chance that Power Reviews is the engine behind that. There's a couple other companies that we competed with, but we were working with about 1,000 brands at the time. What happened was, again, I was the chief revenue officer. Our marketing team hired a local university to do a research study just to look at, all right, when a website is acting as a salesperson, what do people do? And the results came back. There was 3 data points out of it, 2 of which changed my life. That could only happen to a nerd. Like, I quit my job and wrote a book. Like that's how crazy I am. But with 3 data points, the one that didn't surprise me, maybe one part of it did, was that 96% of us read reviews before we buy something we haven't bought before that's of medium to high consideration, right? So buying a pack of gum, you're probably not going to read reviews, but if you're buying, a new refrigerator or whatever, like you're probably going to read the reviews. The 2 data points that changed my life, though. Number 1, 85% of us go to the negative reviews first. So we skip the 5s and go right to the 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s. And the second data point is that a product on a 5-star scale, and this is across all product categories, so some skew differently, but when the average review score is between a 4.2 and a 4.5. That is optimal for purchase conversion, meaning a product on a website, again, when a website's acting as a salesperson, that's got negative reviews right under it, like, I didn't like this product, it actually helps the product sell more. And I thought, all right, that's when we as a consumer are left to our own devices and we're doing our own homework and we're trying to get to a purchase decision quickly, and a website's acting as a salesperson. Would this apply to when a human is acting as a salesperson in a B2B instance? And I found really, really quickly that all the behavioral science said yes. That when we can lead with a flaw, or something competitor does better, something that might not work in the customer's environment, maybe our pricing is high, and we want to, when we lead with that and we use that up front, because remember, 85% of us are going to the negative reviews first. We disarm that brain's resistance to influence. We speed decision making time. We increase our win rates dramatically, partially because we're qualifying deals in faster that we should win, but partially because we're going to lose faster too. That if we're going to lose fast, right? And that's the old axiom, but transparency is the way to do that. And so I started trying it, and the results were freaking crazy. Like the first time I tried it, and what normally would be a 6-month sales cycle, we had a decision in 10 days, and they threw out their whole RFP process. They didn't have us fly to New York as a team. I mean, it was nuts. And then those customers became our biggest advocates really, really quickly. And we're like, we got to keep doing this. And I just got to a point where I was like, I got to get these ideas out there. So to me, transparency is about helping the buyer predict. It's about, because that our brains, we as human beings, we're forecasting machines, right? Like we don't make decisions until we can get comfortable with our prediction. And if we as salespeople keep presenting our solutions as being perfect 5-star solutions, we're not aiding the buyer in making a decision, because that's not how our brains work. We're forcing the buyers to go do more homework, right? To go research on their own, to actually trust what the competitor's telling them. And we then slow down sales cycles. We lose slowly, and we empower our competitors to better message against us too. I just think that transparency, it sells better than pretending to be perfect. And because of the proliferation of reviews and feedback on everything we do, buy, and experience today, we got to do it anyway. And so that's transparency.
So if you're not sold on that, you got to do it anyway. So whatever.
Exactly. I mean, you could get away with it back when I was selling SAP in the late 1990s, right? What are they going to do? Call an 800 number, send a letter? Like, no. But today, the negative word spreads so quickly that we've got to be transparent and help them predict. And if we sell them something, here's I'm going to blend two things here for you. 1919, 102 years ago, Arthur Dunn, who is like one of my favorite authors of the time, he's got a line. His quote is my favorite quote of all time in sales. And it's simply this: if the truth won't sell it, don't sell it. Right? I love that quote, but that's transparency. Like, transparency is lead with the truth, help your buyer to predict, help them make the best decision, whether it's with you or against you. And when I look at your 6, the sixth one on your list is future orientation. And I look at that and go, while these other ones, yeah, I mean, transparency sells better than perfection. No doubt about it. It also retains better. It grows better. It hires better. It leads better. Like, it does all those things better. But we've all, as salespeople, have to take the future orientation, play the long game. And if you're a sales leader listening to this, future orientation, Fred, out of your 6, like, that's the one that we all need to be banging the drum on.
Interesting. So let me just go back to this lead with a flaw bit. So I suspect a lot of people listening to this going, hang on, is he saying that I've got to rock up to a customer and say, hey, Mr. Customer, glad we got a chance to speak. Before we do it, you should know we're not terribly good at this piece, but we're excellent at these other bits. Is that too simplistic? Am I kind of dumbing it down too much, or how does that sound in real life?
Well, let's start with the wisdom of a supermodel, because, like, why wouldn't we? I don't know if you know Tyra Banks, supermodel, business mogul. she coined a term, flawsome, right? Flawsome means to embrace your flaws, but to know you're still awesome. And so I get, the first thing to think about is remember the 4.2 to 4.5 range. I'm not advocating for anybody to go into all your customer meetings and be like, hey, this is why we suck. Like, no, take it easy, right? Like that's taking it too far. It's about helping the buyer predict. If you were in their shoes, what would concern you? What's the elephant in the room? And what are you going to love, right? Like the first time I had tried this, for example, I had had a meeting. It was with a big apparel retailer up in New York. I walked in. There's a long story as to why I wasn't prepared for what they were going to ask me for. I thought I was having coffee with the head of e-commerce. I walked into a room. He handed me the HDMI cable to plug my laptop in for my presentation. I'm like, I thought we were having coffee. And then I looked to my right and people were wheeling chairs in, right? So I'm in a Manhattan office, 9 of us jammed in, and they're expecting a presentation. And I was fresh off all this research. That head of e-commerce, if you've been to New York or know New Yorkers, he was very New York in the best way possible, meaning there was no small talk. He was just right to it, right? And he just came at me with, Todd, listen, we're talking to your competitor. We're talking to you. How are you better? And I kind of looked at everybody in the room and I could see like their arms going up, like, here's the sales pitch. And I just decided I'm going to try it. Like this was literally the first time I tried it. And so I was like, listen, before we get too deep into this, can I start with how the competitor is better than us? And I know that sounds crazy, but they just released an add-on to their core technology that not only do we not have, but it's not even on our roadmap. And so if that's going to be an important consideration in your evaluation, can we talk about that now instead of 6 months from now, after you've done RFPs, we've responded, we've flown up back and forth to New York? Like, again, like that could be an important piece if I'm in your shoes. And unfortunately, we don't have it. And they're like, you could feel the whole room disarm. And they're like, what is it? And I literally pitched it as though I was the competitor. Here's what it does. Our first customer is in the apparel space. I went through all of that. They talked about it and they're like, no, we hadn't considered that either. Maybe down the road, but like, Todd, what would you and your company do if we did decide we wanted that? And I was like, I don't know. They just announced it yesterday. I don't know. Like, we'll find it, right? And it was like this honest conversation where instead of it being customer vendor, it was a bunch of people sitting around a desk in a Manhattan office trying to make the right decision for one another. And they ended up, after about 5 minutes of discussing this, they said, no, it's not going to be a criteria. It was not going to be in the RFP. Like, all right, cool. Here's what we're great at. We sacrifice those things to be great at our core. Within about 10 minutes, that head of e-commerce kicked everybody out of his office saying, hey, I've heard enough. Have you all heard enough? And they're like, yeah, we're good. They all got up and left. He pulled out his actual budget and showed it to me. And the 5th line down was ratings and review software. I had never had a buyer actually show me their budget, and he was doing it within 15 minutes of me meeting him. And they ended up throwing out the RFP process. They didn't have anybody fly around. They made their decision in 10 days versus what was originally laid out to be essentially a 4 to 5 months evaluation process, chock full of RFPs and traveling. And that's when I was like, all right, there's something to this. And so that was when like the kind of the rolling stone started, and it led to the book, The Transparency Sale. And I'm still yapping about it here, 4 years later.
No. It makes sense. It makes sense you're still talking about it. But it's, yeah, I can see why that would work like that. In fact, funny enough, from book reviews, people say if you've got all 5-star book reviews, you don't want that because everyone just thinks that's all your mates. As soon as you get one star, it's like, yes, I'm a real author for a start. And
my nephew,
it's going to bring my numbers down.
My nephew gave me a 4-star review for that reason. I'm still mad at him, right? Like, I'm like, no, you can't like inflate or deflate reviews, right? Like, they've always got to be authentic and true, and like we can see through the fake. But that was kind of a funny example. It was like, oh, you had too many 5-star reviews, so I gave you a 4. I'm like, no.
Or he thought it was 4 stars.
Well, maybe he did, and he's just lying to me.
Which either way, no win for him.
Exactly.
Oh no, that so interesting. So lead with the flaw. It's like accept that, because if you keep pretending that you're so perfect, everyone's just going to go, well, you're not. Nobody is.
Exactly. We subconsciously know that.
So you talk about it in control. It's I'm going to talk about that when I'm ready, and that's before you've even had a chance to try to trip me up on it. I'm going to flag it up, elephant in the room, like you say, deal with it, because I've now practiced the words. I know the words. They'll go, oh, fair enough then, but you must be good at some stuff. Oh, yeah, we are. Oh, let me tell you about all that then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you think about, I don't know if have you been to an Ikea before, furniture retailer?
Yeah, I tried to and get around it first, but you can't nip straight to the cafe, can you? Get the meat.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, so like Ikea, I look at a lot of business to consumer brands and go, they embrace this idea of telling the world what they give up to be great at their core, right? Like you walk into an Ikea and they have to give you a map, like you just said. Like, you're in for it at a retailer if you need a map. Like, this is going to suck. And like you find what you're looking for. There's no salesperson around to help you. You got to write down the code or take a picture of it with your phone, because you're going to the warehouse to pull the giant boxes onto a cart that doesn't have brakes, jam it into your car Tetris style, drive home with an injury, open the box. There's 150 parts and no words on the work instructions. And then you get done and you're like, that looks pretty good. Like, we should have bought the end tables with this bedroom set. It doesn't make sense that you could have such a terrible experience and still create the number one furniture retailer in the world for 14 straight years. But that's what Ikea does. They say, hey, listen, you're going to find it. You're going to pick it. You're going to pack it. You're going to jam it. You're going to assemble it. Yeah, we're giving that stuff up, but we do that so we can give you modern Scandinavian design furniture that you didn't pay much for. And so if you want to come in here and you want your living room feng shuied and all the furniture delivered, assembled and all that, cool. That's not us. Go over there. What does that do for Ikea? Well, their reviews are all fantastic because expectations are set accurately, right? Everybody that walks into that store is pre-qualified, right? They're drawing people in based on an expectation that we're going to have this nightmare, but the end result is going to be furniture that looks pretty good, it looks pretty modern, and I didn't pay a whole lot for it, right? And I think that there's a ton of companies that have done that really well. And I just think that's also an opportunity, not only at the sales level to lead with your flaws and present your solutions as though you're a 4.2 to 4.5, but I think that B2B companies have an opportunity to start essentially branding what they give up to be great at their core too.
Oh no. Which is book 2, correct? Or is that no? Oh, that's book 3. Oh, we might be on exclusive.
Yeah, maybe it would be transparent branding. That's there's an idea. I'm thinking, gosh, I've got so many ideas now. Now, book number 2 is taking all of these concepts to sales leadership. So the book number 2 is The Transparent Sales Leader. It'll be out in the spring. And it was really born of this idea that, I don't know about you and in your career, like what you've done, but for me, I first got promoted into a senior sales leadership role I was running sales ops. But before that, I was a rep. And I was always I always had a process. I always had a structure. I always had a foundation. All of a sudden I get into sales leadership and I've got nothing. Like, I was like a dog chasing a car down the street, never knowing which way the car was going. It was like every morning you'd wake up and my job was to attend to the fire that was going on that day. It's a underperforming rep or key deal or forecast that was due or a board meeting, or I have to hire people. And so I created a framework for sales leadership just for myself that became affectionately known as the 5 F's of maximizing revenue capacity. And I started using it for all my planning, my strategizing, my communication, one-on-ones with my board, all hands meetings. And then over the years, I've grown it, but I ended up taking that and it helped me to be proactive instead of reactive, to see the holes before they formed. It was super simple for me to internalize, so that when the bullets started flying, when I'd get in like a rough board meeting or something, I always had that to fall back on. And so part 1 of the new book is the framework that any sales leader, whether you're aspiring or you've been doing it for 30 years, you can just take this framework and it becomes your job description and the way that you think about it, so you can be proactive instead of reactive. And then part 2 is the behavioral science of how to drive and maximize intrinsic inspiration from your team so that they keep coming back every day. So they stay, they outperform, and they become advocates for your organization. And it's all founded in this idea of you need a structure, you need to be sincere and transparent, and you need the science to all back that up. So it's the transparent sales leader coming out in the spring.
Oh, brilliant! I'll look forward to it. Look forward to that one as well. Oh no, this is so cool. The stuff that you're saying here, and I'm sure people are still listening. And I still can't get my head around this. It's a bit counterintuitive to lead with the flaw and to say the stuff that we're not good about it. But yeah, if something sounds too good to be true, and it probably is. It's like another. These sayings are there for a reason, aren't they?
Well, exactly. I mean, your job as a sales professional is to help your buyer buy, right? It's to make sure that you're, creating the right fit. And when I think about your 6, like we joked about, like 3.5 of them are like really transparency oriented. The first one is, how do you build trust, right? As a buyer, we're prediction machines. Like I said, like everything we do, before you even stand up, your brain predicts it and starts to beat a little bit faster, right? Like our brains predict. As a buyer, we need to be able to predict. And if you don't trust the source for which the information is coming from for you to predict, you can't make a decision. So that first one, trust. We must have a foundation of trust, and transparency is the fastest path to that trust. Number 2 is a win-win orientation. You as a sales professional, when you do this right, where let's say you lead with a flaw, or lead with a shortcoming, or lead with something a competitor does bigger or better, or lead with your pricing being higher than the competitor, whatever it is, what's amazing is that creates that win-win orientation, so that if it turns out that you're not the right fit for that client, now, again, lose fast so you can spend your time on the opportunities or finding the opportunities that you should win. But you'd be amazed that combination of trust and win-win relationship brings those customers back around to you later, right? And so it goes to the 6th one, future orientation, which is about playing the long game. Transparency is the greatest path to playing the long game, building trust-based relationships where your customers that do buy more, and they stay and they advocate, right? And again, lose fast. And then, of course, self-disclosure and feedback, I think it speaks for itself that it's kind of based in this idea of self-disclosure, not only from a personal perspective, but if that customer was sitting in our conference room when we were having an internal meeting about what we need to work on and what our roadmap is going to look like and what we're not going to do, that you should, if you lead with that with your customers so that it feels like they're in that internal meeting conference room with you, you'd be amazed at how quickly customers start to buy and stay and buy more and become advocates for you.
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing even if you don't lead and you realize that's what they're discussing, and you think, actually, they're going down the route of the stuff we're not so good at, rather than go, let's hope they don't realize.
Exactly. Well, exactly.
So actually, I can see which route you guys are going. Let me talk about how we are in that and fess up to it. People, that will shock people anyway. They'll be like, whoa.
Well, yeah. And again, think about yourself. If you're buying something online, do you read the 5-star reviews, or do you go right to the 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s? Again, it's like you said, we at a subconscious level know perfection is not a thing. Like perfection does not exist. And we have to, we're trying to predict, is the juice going to be worth the squeeze? Yeah. And if all we keep hearing about is how great and tasty and nutritious the juice is, and we have no idea what the path is to get to it, what that squeeze is going to look like, there's going to be if we're not able to predict that, then every word of your 5-star speak is going through a filter, which is essentially a BS filter. It's just like, but, if you can lead with that, like, hey, listen, it's, for example, when you go to an amusement park and you're going to go ride a roller coaster, right? You've got an expectation that the lines are probably going to be long on a Saturday afternoon in the summer, right? But yet you still get in that line because it's coming, right? And so you go like your favorite taco shop. That it's super popular and there's always 10 people in line, but you still go. We'll wait for things when the expectation is set, right? That's going to be the negative. That's going to be like the thing. I'm going to have to wait in line for this. I know it, but I'm good with it. That's what draws people to you pre-qualified. If I'm in a hurry, I'm not going to that taco shop, right? I might go to the deli place down the street. But if I can handle the downside, I can't wait for those incredible tacos, right? And that's the way that we all need to be thinking about it, is set proper expectations, do it up front. This is what you're going to give up to be great at this core. A lot of the greatest brands in the world do this, and they do it incredibly well. And I just think that you as a salesperson and you and your organization have a tremendous opportunity to not only differentiate in your product suite, your pricing, your go-to-market, but in the way that you sell. I think it's an opportunity to differentiate in a new way that nobody else can do.
No, it really is. It really is. So how can people get in touch with you? Because I suspect they might want to hear a little bit more. We've got the podcast. If they want to know a bit more about history, you've only mentioned 3 people. You've already said there's 5 all-time greats, and there's 12 just for 1922. So just remind us the podcast title.
It's called the Sales History Podcast. And it's available anywhere that you listen. This article that I'm writing it's probably going to be out in a couple of weeks. I don't know when we're publishing this podcast, but I'm really collecting all of the data around it. Like I said, I want it to be the top 10, but right now I've got 12 sales influencers that I think if you were alive in 1922, you'd want to be following, that are just brilliant minds. But in terms of finding me, I'm hard not to. Just a simple Google search. But the book is available anywhere that you buy books, the Transparency Sale. Website is toddcaponi.com. Lots of free stuff there, newsletter, and then follow or connect with me on LinkedIn. I publish a lot of my nonsense there too.
Oh, that's not nonsense. It is. There's a lot of nonsense on LinkedIn, but I love reading it. It always makes me smile when you've found a new thing. Whatever. It's not a new thing. When you found an old thing.
Yes, that too. Exactly.
No, Todd, superb. Thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. And I'm looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to this list. I really am.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, any time I have a chance to nerd out on sales history is a good day for me. So thanks for having me on.
No, pleasure. You're welcome back.